Wide receivers have been low-key just as hard as getting the tight end position right this year in fantasy, so we can't waste time on this one. All I ask is that you go down there, drop a like on the video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support. So getting into our first tier right here, obviously we've got our big name guys. CeeDee Lamb makes his return as number one. I know, I was way too low on him last week. This dude coming out of the bye week looks exactly like he did last year coming out of the bye. He is absolutely dominant out of a bye. Whatever the reason is, he obviously dominated against the San Francisco 49ers. And at the Atlanta Falcons, the matchup should be really good for CD again. And then Jamar Chase at number 2 and AJ Brown at number 3. With Jamar Chase, the only problem that Jamar Chase has right now is when T. Higgins doesn't play, he looks like he's just overwhelmed a little bit in fantasy. He can't beat triple coverage as easily as he used to sometimes, right? Now, there's also an element to it where it's the Bengals offensive line isn't protecting Joe Burrow long enough for Jamar Chase to get open down the field a ton. So there is that element to it. But against the Raiders here, I don't worry about any of those things particularly. So I've got Jamar Chase here clearly having a big game. And then AJ Brown versus the Jags here. This matchup is excellent. Absolutely fantastic. The Jags have been a disgrace covering the wide receiver position in fantasy. And A.J. Brown coming off a little bit of a down game. That's because Devonta Smith had a good game. Those two guys really kind of rarely coexist with each other in fantasy football as far as big games go. I think this is a big A.J. Brown week. And then Justin Jefferson at number 4 to round the tier out. Versus the Colts here, matchup is fantastic. Justin Jefferson has been so good this year, all things considered, right? Sam Darnold's starting to show some cracks a little bit, but Darnold has still been really good enough to supply Justin Jefferson with tons of upside in fantasy football. So I don't really worry about Justin Jefferson's upside any particular week, but especially in a really good matchup here, I think the ceiling might be as high as it's been all year for Justin Jefferson versus the Colts. Dropping down to our next tier right here, Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill at number 5 and Drake London at number 6. Tyreek Hill at the Buffalo Bills this week. Tyreek Hill obviously was a massive disappointment this past week in fantasy. It did not come to fruition. Maybe that's because he was kind of dealing with an injury and just wasn't fully healthy. That may very well be the reason of what happened on Sunday versus the Arizona Cardinals. I don't love this matchup very much, though. This Dolphins team has been historically bad against the Buffalo Bills with Tua Tagovailoa, and I don't like the direction that Buffalo's team is heading in when you're actually playing them. Buffalo, they look really good right now, and their defense is pulling it together. So with Tyreek Hill, obviously the big play capability is there. I want to see him hit it first, though, before I start ranking him back inside of Tier 1, to be completely honest with you guys. And then Drake London here at 6. Down game, he's going to be fine. He's playing the Cowboys this week, and they're very, very beatable everywhere on the defense. You can run on them, you could throw them, and you could do whatever you want to with the Cowboys defense here. They're banged up, and they're just a bad football team. So Drake London, I have tons of confidence in him this week, having the rebound game against the Cowboys. Puka Nacua at 7, Malik Neighbors at 8 to round out the tier here. Puka Nacua at the Seattle Seahawks came back and absolutely dominated last Thursday night versus the Minnesota Vikings of all teams. So Puka Nacua, what he clearly showed us on Thursday night was that there's really no question. It's him. Number 1 wide receiver, it's him. Most people thought coming into the year that Puka was going to be the wide receiver 1. It was confirmed. Finally, he had a shot to confirm that because there was doubters with Cooper Kupp side. It's Puka Nacua. So Puka against the Seattle Seahawks, a team that Buffalo just ripped apart through the air. I love this matchup for Puka Nacua, especially off a little bit of a mini bye since they played on Thursday night. And then Malik Neighbors here. Malik Neighbors doesn't have the best game against the Pittsburgh Steelers, but the guy is still getting peppered with targets. The targets are not the issue here for Malik Neighbors. It's the quarterback. And everybody understands that, right? Everybody knows that he's going to get tons of targets. Whether or not, Daniel Jones can hit him, that's his problem. But I will say this, Malik Neighbors did drop some passes the other night, and I did not like to see that because there was balls that he could have caught, just didn't come down with them. So Malik Neighbors did have some shortcomings, but against the Commanders, I like the potential for a big bounce-back game this week. Dropping out to our next tier, Amon-Ra St. Brown at number 9 and Jaden Reed at number 10. These two guys in the same matchup. Actually, Amon-Ra St. Brown's been pretty disappointing this year. Let's just get real about it. Even last week when they committed murder on national television to the Tennessee Titans. And nobody said anything about it. Amon-Ra St. Brown, came away with a touchdown. That was basically it. He really didn't do much. At the Green Bay Packers here, I think this is a really competitive matchup, and I think that the over-under of the week is going to show for it in Vegas here. So I just want options in this matchup, and that's why I've got Jaden Reed at 10. Listen, over the last month, it's been pretty bad with Jaden Reed. And this is coming from a guy who says, always start Jaden Reed. I call him Deebo Samuel Jr. once a week at least. At least once a week, I get my fix. So I'm a big Jaden Reed guy. But obviously, you can't ignore what's happened the past month. Jaden Reed, it just boils down to this. I want options in this matchup. I just want them. Now, if Jordan Love doesn't play, he's moving down. It totally affects Jaden Reed in fantasy if Jordan Love does not play. We'll monitor this one throughout the week, but keep an eye on this one because if Jordan Love plays, I simply just want options in this matchup. And if he doesn't have a big rebound game, then we'll have a real conversation about dropping him down into the 20s. I'm not there yet. And then Terry McLaurin round the cheer out. First of all, can we get a round of applause for how good Terry McLaurin has been in fantasy? He's been awesome in fantasy football this year. Called the guy a league winner before the year started, and he has totally brought that to the table. This guy's been lights out. At the New York Giants this week, definitely a beatable matchup, and just the way that him and Jaden Reed, the chemistry that they have built together this year has been awesome. It's what I thought Caleb and DJ Moore were going to build. Instead, Jaden Daniels and Terry McLaurin have totally built the best chemistry among any quarterback and wide receiver combination. Terry McLaurin is must start at this point. Do not put him outside the top 12. And one other thing you definitely can't do this week is shortchange CJ Stroud by not hitting the higher on his projection on Underdog this week because it's at 0.5 total yards, man. So if you have not gotten on Underdog yet, this is a new customer offer right here. Go down in the comments, grab the link that's there, and use code FVN to sign up for Underdog. When you hit the higher on the CJ Stroud projection here at 0.5 total yards, they'll match your first deposit 50% up to $1,000 of bonus cash. So if you want free money, take advantage of the CJ Stroud free projection this week. Dropping down to our next tier right here. I've got two injured guys. We'll see what happens. DK Metcalf, Brian Thomas Jr. Now with DK Metcalf, I've seen positive reports. Brian Thomas Jr., iffy reports. DK Metcalf to start out with him. Obviously, he misses the game on Sunday versus the Buffalo Bills. They get crushed without him. They need him for sure. He's a big play threat for them. Everybody understands he's the best wide receiver in Seattle at this point. So I have read that he has good potential to return, and they're optimistic about him returning this week versus the Los Angeles Rams. And if he does, I want the matchup here. The Rams defense, I'll say this, quietly getting pretty good actually week by week. But DK Metcalf still, at this point, he is still the big play threat that they need, and his ceiling is obviously stupid high. In a division matchup, I would want him if he plays, but monitor it. Brian Thomas Jr. We got a report on Monday that he was going to miss the next 2 to 4 games with the chest injury. Then not so long after, Doug Peterson calls him day-to-day. So that puts him in play 100%. If he's day-to-day, that totally puts him in play to play this week against the Philadelphia Eagles. And if he plays in that game, sign me up. Like, I want in on the matchup. Watch this one throughout the week. If he plays, he's all they've got at this point. And he's all they've had, but especially without Christian Kirk, since he's done for the year now, the focus is all on Brian Thomas Jr. So if he plays, you play him, but obviously watch this one. Tank Dell at 14 and Garrett Wilson at 15. Tank Dell has been pretty disappointing, but there's about to be a major need. If you did not see on Sunday, Stephon Diggs down with a non-contract knee injury. Probably spelling ACL tear. We don't know for sure yet as of the time of this filming. By the time you're watching, we may get some more word. But Tank Dell, if he's the wide receiver one, they still don't have Nico for one more week. So hopefully he can survive this week. But against the New York Jets here, the Jets have been beatable. Like, the Jets defense is just been objectively bad since they fired Robert Saleh. It's not a question anymore. This is not speculation. Look at the numbers and look at what they've done. They've been objectively awful defensively. Tank Dell has a beatable matchup here, and I'll take him this week over Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson, here's the problem, right? Garrett Wilson has so far been the better wide receiver in fantasy between him and Davante Adams. No question about that right now. But Garrett Wilson has had 2 lower ceiling games with Davante Adams there. Since there's 2 wide receivers now that are really good players, it's not like going to be an explosion 25-point game from Garrett Wilson like we saw before the Davante Adams trade. So against the Houston Texans on Thursday night here, listen, I like the matchup. I think that the matchup is just fine, But Garrett Wilson is just not in a position right now where I'm expecting a ton of fantasy points. He's going to be solid, but he's not going to be excellent. That's why he's at 15. And then rounding out the tier at 16, Cooper Kupp at the Seattle Seahawks. I think that Cooper Kupp, like I said, it's very clear that Puka Nacua is the number one wide receiver in Los Angeles at this point. I don't think it's really debatable. But obviously, if Stafford plays the way he just played on that Thursday night game versus the Vikings, it's going to be hard to stop this passing offense, man. Cooper Kupp has upside at the red zone still. He still has that upside, and he still gets enough targets to give you solid wide receiver 2 value. So against the Seattle Seahawks, I like the matchup here. Cooper Kupp can take advantage of it as long as he didn't have a setback with the ankle. Dropping out to our next tier, Amari Cooper at 17 and Chris Olave at 18. Amari Cooper, I get it. Horrible game he's coming off of. Definitely was not the top target in that game versus the Seahawks here. Keep a couple things in mind. Number one, it was his second game with the Buffalo Bills. Number two, they blew out the Seahawks. They didn't need to use him. Versus the Miami Dolphins this week, not only is the matchup so freaking good versus the Miami Dolphins here, but Amari Cooper is just in position where I don't think that he's going to have weeks like this every single week. That was a down game. In a matchup, they didn't need to throw the ball in that much more as the game went on. They're still trying to get him integrated to the offense. I think this is a good week for him to have a good rebound week. And then Chris Olave at 18. I'll tell you this. The Carolina Panthers matchup is so juicy that I have to buck what I said last week about Chris Olave. I still don't love him. Like, I think that he's hot and cold, just like Marvin Harrison Jr., who we'll get to here in a little bit. But I think that Chris Olave obviously is in good position with this matchup. He's getting Derek Carr back as well by a lot of accounts, so he should be in line for a good game. And he did well last week with like 10 catches and 100 plus yards. He has the potential to do that. He just doesn't do it all the time, but this matchup, I'll take that shot. And then 19 and 20, rounding out the tier. T. Higgins and Devonta Smith. T. Higgins, watch it. Obviously, watch it throughout the week. He had a leg injury pop up late in the week in practice last week. Obviously misses the game versus the Philadelphia Eagles. Taking on the Las Vegas Raiders this week. Love the matchup. If he plays, you play him immediately. This guy has been really important in this offense. 9 targets per game, and he's averaging like almost 14 fantasy points per game in a half PPR format. This guy is so important on an offense that can't run, so they have to utilize both him and Jamar Chase. I want T. Higgins if he plays this week. Just watch it. And then Devonta Smith. Devonta Smith versus the Jags here. The matchup is excellent here. What you kind of have to hedge yourself with Devonta Smith is the fact that sometimes A.J. Brown will have those games where he takes over, and obviously we've seen that over the years. So I'm kind of leaning towards maybe this is more of an A.J. Brown domination game, and I've got Devonta Smith down here at 20, but that being said, the matchup is great for both of them, so obviously I want Devonta Smith still. Dropping down to our next tier. Ladd McConkey makes his freaking breakout game last week against the Cleveland Browns this week. I love Ladd McConkey. He's been pushing top 30 for weeks now. He's been pushing it because the targets have been there, and he's been effective on all his targets. He has the breakout game and actually breaks off a really long touchdown throw. So I really love Ladd McConkey this week. The Cleveland Browns are beatable. They've been beaten several times by wide receivers, and it's starting to kind of happen how I thought it might, where this team is starting to get a little bit hot with Justin Herbert specifically. He's starting to play really, really good football because they're relying on him more to throw a little bit more these days. So with Ladd McConkey here, if that chemistry continues to build, I want him this week against the Browns, and I've got him in a ton of leagues, and I will be playing him. Zay Flowers at 22 versus the Denver Broncos. Here's the thing. Zay Flowers, he's basically around where he's always been for me. I get hate for it. People say you're right. Listen, the reason I always rank him here, what do I say every week? Low floor, high ceiling. Obviously, this week against the Broncos, that's a concerned matchup. But what you can kind of count on here is that he's not going to see Pat Surtain 100% of the game because they move Zay Flowers constantly in this lineup here. So he's not going to be always on the outside playing Pat Surtain. So he's not going to have to, I'm not worried about that. What I'm worried about is what I'm always worried about, which is the potential for him to get a 4-point game. Marvin Harrison Jr. at 23 and Romeo Doubs at 24. Marvin Harrison Jr., listen, very happy to see the big game. I've loved Marvin Harrison Jr. for a long time. I got labeled as a Marvin Harrison Jr. hater. I don't hate the guy. I freaking love the guy. He's a great prospect and a great player. He has been playing like a great player up until on Sunday. So, listen, I'm all in. And the Chicago Bears matchup, though, that matchup stinks. That matchup's not good. Just look back. Outside of Terry McLaurin, they have made life really hard for wide receiver ones in fantasy football. So I don't like this matchup here. This is a hot and cold offense, and Marvin's been a hot and cold player. I'm hedging my bet against Marvin Harrison Jr. personally this week. Don't hate the guy. You could say whatever you want to in the comments. Just know that I don't hate Marvin Harrison Jr. I love him, don't love the matchup. And then Romeo Doubs at 24. Listen, this guy has been consistently this wide receiver one. Like, the last month, he's been getting targeted the most, and he's running the most pure wide receiver, possession receiver routes. So versus the Detroit Lions this week, in a game where, again, I think this could be a really high-scoring matchup, and I want options, and Romeo Doubs, realistically, I don't think has the ceiling of Jayden Reed. When Jayden Reed hits, he hits big. But he does have the consistency that Jayden Reed doesn't have right now. So Romeo Doubs, I might be a little bit too low on him. We'll see what y'all think, but I've got him here at 24 and a very, very good play this week in fantasy. Dropping down to our next tier, DeAndre Hopkins at 25 and Davante Adams at 26. DeAndre Hopkins here, listen, I'm not going to overreact on this one. Last week heading into the week, I was getting tons of questions, obviously, about should I play him for X or should I play X player? And a lot of times I found myself steering people away from DeAndre Hopkins for multiple reasons. Coming into a new team in his first week, didn't like that opportunity. And also, this guy is just not the same player. He's not. And I love DeAndre Hopkins, but he's not the same guy. So I do like him in fantasy. Another week with the Chiefs just gives me good upside. And then with the Tampa Bay matchup here, love the matchup. But again, I think we just need to temper expectations with this guy. He's not like a fast guy anymore. He runs good routes, and he has good hands, but he's not going to get a bunch of yards after the catch. That's just not his MO these days. So just understand his ceiling's a little capped, but obviously I like him a lot better this week than I did last week. And then Davante Adams here versus the Houston Texans. Again, I don't have a problem with the matchup in particular, but it's been clear. Garrett Wilson has been the better fantasy player, and he's been getting more. He got more targets against New England Patriots. Adams is still good. He's still going to be involved every single week, but Davante Adams just doesn't look like it's working with the Jets to the level that I wanted it to. So yes, still think he's a good option this week, but definitely is not in the ceiling category that I think even Garrett Wilson is in that same offense, because Garrett Wilson definitely has the big play threat that Davante Adams doesn't seem to have so far with the New York Jets. Keon Coleman at 27 and Jacoby Myers at 28. Keon Coleman, since Amari Cooper has been there, 2 straight stud games. Is it a coincidence? No, it's not. The reason it's not is because this guy was never ready to be a wide receiver one. That's okay. He shouldn't have been looked at as a wide receiver one. He wasn't ready. He was a raw prospect. But now that he doesn't have that pressure, he's playing lights out football. Amari Cooper takes off the pressure from him. So against the Miami Dolphins this week, the big playability is massive for Keon Coleman this week. This is a big boom play, but definitely still has a lower floor. I still do think that's why he's still down here at 27. And then Jacoby Myers is 28. Get ready for this guy to go in your lineup weekly, especially if you're struggling at flex. This is a 10 target per game type of guy. He will hit big weeks. Some weeks, but also a lot of times he's just going to be consistent. Versus the Cincinnati Bengals here, the matchup's really good. I just don't trust the Raiders quarterback situation, so I can't put him too high, but Jacoby Myers still is a very good play this week. And then dropping down to our last tier, I made a very specific tier for our last 2 guys here because they both scare me so bad. Josh Downs and Michael Pittman Jr. Here's the deal. You ready? The Indianapolis Colts are a disaster with Anthony Richardson. We all understand that. Anthony Richardson pulled himself out of the game on Sunday because he was tired. So you know what happened? Shane Steichen, the head coach over there, came back and said, well, yeah, I don't know, we'll reevaluate things. We're not sure when he was asked about who's going to be a starting quarterback. If Anthony Richardson's benched, these 2 guys are immediately playable in fantasy football. But if it's Anthony Richardson, they both scare me so bad because they both have upside, but they have the lowest floor ever. So watch this one throughout the week. If it's Anthony Richardson, these guys are not going to be top 30 guys. If it's Joe Flacco, these guys both move up the rankings. And as I do at the end of every single week, I give you my favorite underdog wide receiver play of the week if you are playing an underdog draft this week. And I think you should be using this guy this week. Courtland Sutton at the Baltimore Ravens here. Number 1, Courtland Sutton, obviously is the wide receiver 1 in Denver. That goose egg that he gave you against the New Orleans Saints, they didn't need to throw to him very much because they were crushing the Saints. Obviously, this matchup here is so good. Like, every wide receiver that's played Baltimore has crushed them. Baltimore's secondary has not been good versus wide receivers in fantasy. So Courtland Sutton, the way that Bo Nix has been playing lately, I want a piece of this offense a little bit right now, and Courtland Sutton is the big play guy that I would want in this type of matchup. So let me know how your team is looking so far this week, and if you want to see what the buy low trade targets are this week, click on this video right here.